Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. So in the video today, I wanted to talk about something that I wasn't going to talk about, but I think would probably be a pretty important topic to discuss. And that is the development of a programming standard. Now, as programmers, I'm sure you have come up with your own process. Everybody has a different method for writing their programs, and by all means, if you have a process involved, if you've already got something that you follow and that you like using, then by all means, follow that logic. Do what makes you feel more comfortable. But the purpose of this video is simply to, for one, show you guys my programming standard so that as we look at programs in the future, we have an understanding of what I'm using and how I like to prepare my projects. In addition to that, it's also to kind of give a little bit of inspiration to people just getting into engineering or just starting into the field of controls if they haven't been around long enough to have built their own standard over time. This might give them some ideas as to ways they could also standardize their programs to make their lives a little easier as they build more projects in the future. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at my programming standard. Alright, so what I have here is an Excel document that I've prepared a little while back to kind of write down the standard that I decided to use for my projects. Now, I would like to point out that this written document actually is newer than most of the projects that I originally started first coming out of school and the first several projects that I did for commercial use. But even back then, and I'll show you later in the video, even back then, I did still kind of follow this method. It matured over time, but this is basically an evolution of what I was already doing. So, all I did here was put it into an actual document, something written down, so that if I were to bring engineers into a private company of my own, I would like them to kind of follow the standard that I've written down so as to be consistent across the board. Or as I build more projects in the future, I will maintain this standard to kind of have something documented. It will probably evolve over time. I may add things or take things out that don't make sense, or whatever the case may be, but this is essentially the method that I use today. So what we have here is the first series of columns is the tag structure. So that's the primary focus of the programming standard, is kind of documenting the tag structure that you're using when you're using tag-based programs. And this is the case for most of the projects that I've done are based in Studio 5000. That is a tag-based programming language. And in the case that you have a tag-based programming language, and that's what I'm using, this is the method that I will use to create that project. So along the left-hand column is the abbreviation. So this is the first series of characters used to define what that tag represents. So the reason I do it this way is the tag database, at least in Studio 5000, is arranging the tags in alphabetical order. So the reason that I have this abbreviation in the first set of characters is to help isolate the tags so that they fall in alphabetical order, and also similar tags are grouped together. An example of this would be all of the digital input proximity sensors or photocells or whatever would all be in the same bundle of the tag database. Now, of course, if you really wanted to, you could simply just use the search feature of Studio 5000's tag database to find a specific tag. But while scrolling through, or as you write the logic, it's easier because when you bring up the tags that you want to use for a specific element that you've brought in, it's going to bring down the drop-down menu. And if all I have to do is just type the first few characters, it's going to bring the list up of everything that's associated with those abbreviated characters. So it kind of helps with the search process. It makes the process of generating your logic and finding tags a lot simpler. In addition, it helps to give a good example of what is that specific tag doing. It's a digital input, but what kind of digital input? In this case, PX for proximity sensor. So not only do you know that it's a digital input, but you also know that it's a specific type of sensor, which can help you when generating your other logic. Because sometimes if you have the same part of the equipment, you may find that a lot of the tag names or a lot of the sensor names tend to be related. They may even use the same phrasing. But you may have different types of sensors looking at the same thing. So this is a way you can differentiate between types of devices associated with it. And I went through and created a multitude of different examples. So like, main disconnects, breakers, selector switches, joysticks, and control relays, and then auxiliary for like extra stuff that I couldn't really think of the name. And as time goes on, this list gets extended, as different devices come out. And I have the same thing for all types of tags. So like I have the digital inputs, I have analog, digital outputs, analog outputs, and the list just goes on and on. So again, you don't necessarily need to use the same method that I do to create your programs, and there could probably be still some errors in this format, but this is the method that I use, and as of right now, and for the most part, I haven't really come across any negative repercussions for using this type of method. It, for me, has made the process a little more fluid when creating my programs. For an example, I've provided a tag structure example to help kind of illustrate how this tag structure would be used in the actual program. So, like I said, you'd have the abbreviation DI_PX_. That would indicate that it's a digital input, it's a proximity sensor, and then you'd have the name of the sensor. In this case, sorting table part detect. And you can tell I used an example of what's over there on the Marble sorting station, which we'll talk about in a future episode. But this is an example of how that tag would be structured. In addition to the tag structure, I also document other aspects of the programming structure that I feel are important to document. So that would consist of things like having a standardized IP address scheme. So with most modern controls platforms, you're going to find a lot of that revolves around networking. So it kind of makes sense to have a standardized programming structure. So the way that I structure my IP address schemes is I have a pretty standard numeric characterization. So as you can see here, just generic PLC networks are going to be on a 172.121 network. The third byte, or octet as some people say, and I also say myself sometimes, is the different machines that I've written programs for over the years. The last part of that is the fourth octet, or the fourth byte, which is the individual device's IP address. And as you can see here, I have kind of pulled into, basically every possible device scenario that you may have, and just created a range of values that can be used for that specific type of device. Now, there's also a reason for doing this as well. So when you're building your I/O lists and importing all of your Ethernet modules, you'll find that it arranges them in order of the IP address. So the lower numbers are going to be higher up in the list, and the higher numbers are going to go down. So it's just a descending order. Well, actually, that would be ascending, excuse me. So to keep everything organized, that's the reasoning for the increasing value and keeping everything grouped together. The idea is that similar devices will be bunched together and grouped together in the I/O tree, and therefore make it easier to locate specific devices. Like all of the VFDs in the program are going to start at 100, and they're going to go down to, in this case, 49 or 149, excuse me, and other types of drives, let's say servo drives would start at 150 and go to 169. Now some of this could be modified to incorporate more devices. It also depends on how many drives do you really need. Like, do you have more than 50 drives? Then if that's the case, then you may have to kind of finagle with this list a little bit. It's not a concrete example. It's just kind of a general understanding of the ranges that need to be used for a particular project. But if I need more IP addresses, I do have some spares listed towards the end of the list that can be utilized if needed. But essentially all devices that may potentially need an IP address are listed in this document. At least in the vast majority, that's what we have. So real quickly, I thought I'd just show you some programming examples where I'm utilizing the standard, so you can kind of get a better understanding of how I structure my tags. So again, as we stated, the character abbreviation, it keeps everything kind of together. So if I just want to search for digital inputs, I could just type that, and all digital inputs come up just like that. Now, because it kind of looks at the characters, anytime DI is used, it's going to show those as well. But the big ones that you want to see would be under here. And I could, be a little bit more specific in DI underscore, and that separates out DI underscore. Same thing if I wanted to just look at proximity sensors, then it would just show me the proximity sensors used in this specific program. So like I said, that kind of helps with the search process when you're trying to find specific tags rather than just scrolling through. If you have a simple program, you may not have that many tags, and this kind of organizational method doesn't really make sense for you. But in the vast majority of process related programs, you're going to find yourself having quite a lot of tags. So instead of having to scroll through a massive list of tags, you could instead just simply search for the characters in the abbreviation. And just to show you I actually pulled up a program from a couple years ago that I wrote for a company I was working for at the time, and even back then I was following this method. In fact, this is probably one of the earliest programs that I have that I wrote where I was using this alphabetized tag format. So you can see that over time you can see kind of where I deviated from this and it evolved from this methodology to what it is today. But essentially it's the same format. Digital outputs, they're all in one section. Digital inputs are in one section. I have different abbreviations back then than what I was using now, but it's all the same. So I know that was a bit of a short video, and it was more or less just kind of a, this is kind of how I'm doing it kind of thing. Like I said, if you've already got some kind of process in place and you like the method that you use, then by all means, feel free to keep doing what you're doing. I'm not here to tell anybody how to write their programs, because everybody will create their own method over time anyway. Or like if you work for a particular manufacturer, you may find yourself being, required to follow a specific programming format that they've documented, in which case you can't really use your own anyway. This is pretty common for pretty large OE manufacturing companies. But a lot of the smaller companies, they typically don't. Or if you worked as a controls engineer for a private company, you may not ever really have a need to do that. But in any event, the primary focus is to simply just show you how I write my programs and the format and the standard that I try to adhere to in my own work. And for those of you who are just getting out of school and you haven't really gotten that much of a portfolio together of your own programs, or you're, just starting out, then this can probably serve as a best practice kind of example, something that you should probably sit down and try to come up with on your own. Another thing I would suggest doing is probably create a template program. So, write an empty program that's not really meant for doing any actual process, but just, write up a format, a standard document that has all of the tag format that you want to use and has everything structured in a way that makes sense for you, so that you can use that template as an example for projects that will actually be used in process. But anyway, I hope that was educational. Hopefully that was somewhat informative. If you have any questions for me and or regarding this programming standard, or if you have questions about anything else controls related, feel free to leave it down in the comments. If you like this video, please do give it a big thumbs up, or if you don't like it, that's fine. You can give me a downvote. Either way, it helps me understand what kind of content you guys want. And if you like videos like this and you want to see more, I highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button, and we will be back with more videos here in the near future. I've got a video I'm working on about the marble sorter that I have behind me, which I kind of hinted at with my welcome video. So, if you want to check that out, feel free. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Alright. Take care, guys.